Welcome to the Into AI Safety podcast, where we discuss the challenges facing the field of AI safety and those who work within it. This show aims to provide the foundation and resources needed to get up to speed on safe and ethical AI. As always, I am your host, Jacob Hames. During the podcast, you may hear this sound, which denotes that I have included at least one link in the show notes related to the content that preceded the sound. The purpose of this is to allow for citations and providing resources without breaking the flow of conversations. As per usual, items mentioned during asides will have links in the show notes as well. This episode was recorded on May 27th, 2026, and asides were recorded on July 14th, 2026. So this one starts with a little bit of a humble brag, I guess. I was just heading back to my much less expensive hotel from a hotel conference venue when I passed someone who said, "I love your podcast." And I was like, oh my God, it's happening. No, I mean, just only a little bit, but like, I definitely wasn't expecting it, and it did kind of make my day. Anyways, that person was Sukit Chan, who does a bunch of cool stuff, but when I later reached out asking if he'd like to be a guest, he instead recommended I have someone else on, and that's how I got in touch with today's guest, and how could I say no with the path that he's taken? It started out with a PhD at Caltech building hardware for the quantum internet, then moved on to Protocol Labs, a place he jokingly refers to as the biggest blockchain company you've never heard of, where he ran multiple research programs and dabbled in experimental macroeconomics via incentive structured design for cryptocurrencies. Again, his words. After doing that for a few years, a fairly persuasive dinner convinced him to start Atlas Computing, which initially focused on formal methods, not like how you wear a tux, but math stuff, and more recently has decided to pivot to what he calls field strategy, based on his belief that there's a bunch of important work which isn't moving forward, not because it's too difficult, but because it's not the right person's job yet. In addition to a sidetrack into what formal methods even are, we talk about the motivations of Atlas's pivot, the resilience gap map, a tool that they've been working on to identify organization-shaped holes in developing societal resilience, and we even get into value alignment. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry, we'll cover it. Before we start, I wanted to flag a couple things. First, we drop a ton of organization names throughout this one, so I didn't add all the chimes in, but rest assured they're in the show notes. Second, we talked for 2.5 hours, so rather than subject you all to that, anyone who is interested can head over to the Kairos FM Patreon to get more of that sweet, sweet content. Anyways, I'd now like to introduce Dr. Evan Miyazono. In one sentence, if Atlas Computing does exactly what it's trying to do over the next, say, 2 years, what will exist that doesn't currently exist?
My best case success scenario would be that there's a pretty reliable and replicated path to go from here is a thing that we want to see in the world to here is the fastest, cheapest, most reliable intervention that could be funded to create that public good when those problems that we're starting with are coordination failures or market failures or things that don't look like products that one can sell or research solutions that one could discover, but are rather just people doing the things that you would expect them to do if people had perfect coordination and awareness of what everyone else were doing and their skills and more trust, etc.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Probably a bad one sentence.
Well, you know,
Maybe
everyone's
rambly,
really
2 sentences? Yeah.
everyone's really bad at the one sentence thing, but it does make it more like a paragraph, which is nice.
The truest one sentence is like even shorter than a sentence. I want to manifest revolutionary coordination systems.
Okay. I think that's
Too vague. to be helpful.
Too vague, but also like in the context of the last thing does help. So, but before we get into like more about Atlas Computing, what you're currently doing, I want you to contextualize for me just a bit what your journey to that looked like, because based on just my research into what you've done, your PhD finished up in 2017, and you were building hardware for concrete applications of quantum computing, which is just so far away from what you've just described. So please just give
Yes.
me a little bit of context on how you got here.
So I was always loved math and science, ended up in materials engineering for undergrad because I wanted to live in a Star Trek future and thought that materials were like a reasonable, it's a reasonable argument to be made that materials were the blocker on that, because you can just look and see that there were so many new things that science and technology could do in Star Trek. And at the end of undergrad, became convinced I needed more fundamentals, applied to exclusively physics and applied physics PhD programs, which I did not have sufficient background for. Still kind of hadn't understood what a prerequisite was or why they existed by that point. And started working on a project with the research I did specifically for my PhD was trying to build an optical quantum memory for a provably secure quantum internet. I was very excited about doing something that would matter in the world. And I think there was reasonable argument to be made that we got from, for a given set of parameters, 0.01% efficiency to like 0.2% efficiency, which is like a 20x gain, and you only need 5 nines efficiency for this to be a useful engineering material. And so lots of cool physics, lots of experiments. There's a version of this that says I spent the PhD doing simulations and data analysis and nanofabrication and optical characterization. But there's also a version of this that has a much clearer story. That is, I was my advisor's first grad student. I helped set up a bunch of protocols for how new students would join a lab and what the infrastructure looked like and all the relationships with other labs, so that if we needed a piece that we didn't have an extra of, but every reasonable lab would have an extra of, I knew who to go ask and could get us that piece with 0 shipping time. And we would just give them the new one when the one I ordered arrived. So if from that lens, then going and joining a startup that was also working on something that was very value and ideologically based, trying to democratize access to the internet and data storage, starts becoming a much cleaner story than being the first PhD hire at a company called Protocol Labs, which I often joke to people unfamiliar with blockchain as the biggest blockchain company you've never heard of. And there I set up basically all of the research infrastructure. This included how we did a lot of the interviewing, promoting, hiring of researchers, grant sponsorships, advisorships, and also running a special projects team and building out the team that ran the grants program. The CEO would consistently give incredibly ambitious tasks to me, like, Evan, build me the best grants program ever. And that meant that I had to go and figure out what that meant. And to me, I understood that to mean more, better science, faster and cheaper. And faster and cheaper, very measurable. More, better science is incredibly subjective. You get into some weird social choice theory or like economics-y type questions pretty quickly. And it wasn't long before we ended up with like, are we sure grants are the right mechanism? And so for people who are less familiar with blockchain and companies and that that ecosystem, the part that got a lot of visibility and publicity was the part that was very I will claim that blockchains are a generally useful technology. There are many applications where you want a decentralized, permissionless, append-only ledger. However, they are more useful for speculation and fraud than anything else we've come up with so far.
Yeah.
And that kind of draws all the capital out of the room. But there is a corner of the blockchain space that is highly ideological, building good technology for all of the right reasons. And It's interesting because a lot of those relationships are showing back up with a lot of the democratization and security around AI, because ideological, technologically inclined people are less rare than, or are more rare than you or I might like. And as a result, when there are relevant problems that are interesting, the same people do seem to keep showing up again and again. Anyway, so I did a lot of meta science. I occasionally joke that I change fields roughly every like 3 to 5 years. And I think that that's actually still kind of holding up. But while I was at Protocol Labs, there was a lot of supporting of cryptography and decentralized systems and networking. And the ethos was very much one of how do we design the incentives to create the outcomes that we want from players in the system. So it was very much applied mechanism design. I will also sometimes joke that I had a brief stint in experimental macroeconomics, because I don't know how else to describe designing the monetary flows and basically taxation structures for a cryptocurrency, which they call gas fees.
Okay, yeah, I honestly have no clue of anything about crypto. Like, the thing that I know about crypto is that I shouldn't invest in it, personally.
Generally a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are some. I would definitely recommend the 3 Blue 1 Brown video on what does it mean to own a Bitcoin. I think it's
Okay.
one of Grant's most viewed videos, and it does a really great job of explaining how it works, why it's secure, and it really is a novel innovation. I think that like there was definitely a time where stock markets were probably equally rife with speculation and fraud before they were reasonably regulated. And
Well, one could argue
yes,
that maybe things, well, who and what has shifted, but not wholly a different story.
yes, very much.
Um,
So anyway, I spent a lot of time doing mechanism design. The last 2 years at Protocol Labs ended up being chasing down the task of building tools that could fund public goods and commons like research or open source software, and reward in proportion to how impactful those projects were the people who worked on them. And that led to 5 teams, each pursuing a different piece of the solution, and we spun out all of them when I announced in 2023, actually like leading up to parental leave with my second child, starting a new org, or that I would be starting Atlas Computing, 0 stars to starting a new org on parental leave. Would not recommend.
yeah, that sounds like take one of the most like hectic times in your life and then add another one.
And then the other one, yeah.
Yeah. And like, how did that happen? What was the catalyst? I know that at least how you're describing it here is like it's a continuation of the work that you were doing, and you were sort of breaking up these, but there also, at least I'm assuming that there's some sort of catalyst there as to like, oh, now I understand that we need to split this, and this portion in particular is the part that I can play well.
Yeah, and I think that it is definitely the case that I have an easier time telling a story after the fact in hindsight than coming up with that or feeling like I have a coherent narrative in the moment. Anyway, to answer your question, in the moment, it felt like a massive split. I was wild running that post facto venture studio type thing called Network Goods. I was simultaneously supporting a special projects team, which had, I think it ranged between 3 and 7 researchers who were working on things that the CEO and I thought were very important, but where there wasn't otherwise a home or a place for those things to get funded. And One of those projects was David Dalrymple or Davidad working on what was at the time the open agency architecture, which became the ARIA safeguarded AI program.
Okay.
And he and I agreed that it would make a lot of sense for him to run this as a research program. And in deciding between whether that should be a DARPA program or an ARIA program, landed on we both agree he should go to ARIA, but that there should be a nonprofit that does a bunch of other stuff that he wouldn't be able to do reasonably in a science, like a government funding body. And after a few months of looking, I was unable to find a person to run that and raise my hand of, well, I'm not qualified to work in AI, but is this like, if you think I could do it, then like I'm willing to quit this job and do that because this feels like the most important thing that could be done. You can imagine Davidad in 2023 was pretty persuasive to the right person about the risks of AI. And he and Andrew Critch actually sat me down over a dinner and said, we think you should do this. Came back. I think I can. This only makes sense if I can like write checks backed by your reputation. And they were like, okay. And
I mean, that's gotta feel pretty good though, too, right? Like you're
yeah,
two people that, at least really are part of the space and have become well established, and they're saying, like, no, you're the person that should be leading this effort. And what was that? What was your purpose? What were those things that Davidad couldn't do necessarily, and like what was your focus with Atlas Computing to start?
Yeah, the starting focus was to complement Davidad's approach of what is the world we want to build toward with safeguarded AI, where we have evidence-backed quantitative safety margins with AI systems backed by formal methods. He was building for a future that could exist and trying to work backwards to today. And the idea of Atlas was to start from today and work into the future. What things would have to be true in order for safeguarded AI to be very successful? And the biggest hypothesis that seemed untested at the time was, if safeguarded AI works, then there are a lot of people who have gotten very good at doing formal methods, because that was kind of a prerequisite in the tech tree for safeguarded AI. And that wasn't the technology side of it. It was really the user willingness and understanding of why formal methods was useful and why
Maybe this is a great time then to give me a lesson on why formal methods is useful, just to make sure, because I totally know it really, really well, but, just in case. Evan did explain things, but as is the case when you're asked to explain a highly technical concept off the cuff, it was a bit windy and there was a tangent or two, so here's the streamlined version. Formal methods are a family of mathematical tools which allow us to reason about how correct a system is. Formal verification is essentially an application of these tools to check whether a given program is correct. Before getting into formal verification, I think it's helpful to first establish the 3 translation points where things can go wrong on the road from having an intention in your head to having the thing in the real world. Let's say I want a naturally lit place to work in my home. This is the intent, or the thing in my head. After thinking about it a bit, I hire some contractors and I tell them I want a 2 meter by 3 meter window on my south-facing wall. In providing these instructions, I've translated my intent to a specification. The contractors get to work, and some indeterminate amount of time later, I have a window. They have translated my specification into an implementation. Finally, I can begin working next to my new window, translating the implementation into what actually happens in the world, or reality. As I said earlier, each of these translation points represents a place where things could go wrong. Formal verification closes the gap between specification and implementation by introducing a mathematical proof which demonstrates, based on some fundamental model of the underlying hardware or programming language that you're working with, that it must meet all the characteristics in your specification, always. So, if I had some sort of formal verification in this case, I would be able to say with extreme confidence that there was a 2 meter by 3 meter window on my south-facing wall. However, this doesn't address the gap between my intent and what I asked for. For example, in my specification, I assumed that my interpretation of window was the same as the contractor's, so it could just be a hole in the wall or a solid piece of glass that I can't open. This is the specification gap. It also doesn't address the gap between the implementation and what actually happens in the world. Perhaps my neighbor put in a giant billboard just outside my window, or I live in the North Pole and it's December. This is the world model gap.
And so the first things we did at Atlas were trying to prototype first of this formal verification process. What does improvements to artificial intelligence make very easy? What remains very hard?
Okay.
Where should people be paying attention? And so there aren't a lot of, I think that we had some of the earliest artifacts of what could this look like? And what I found initially surprising, but now find very unsurprising, is that a lot of the formal methods community is very skeptical of AI progress. Not just like normal person skeptical, but the way this should make sense is that the bitter lesson is kind of this this now famous statement that, you know, if you just throw more data, it works better than hard coding in human understanding. And if you look at what happened to the field of AI, there are people who stuck with the symbolic reasoning approach. And that subfield has high overlap with formal methods because that includes all of the automated theorem provers and sat solvers and things like this, where you're hard coding those things in. This is getting kind of in the weeds, but it should be, there's a little bit of a selection bias of if you reject the bitter lesson upon coming across it in a very viscerally strong way, I think you are more likely to go into formal methods than basically any other field of computer science, because you would be trying to take the symbolic approach to artificial intelligence, which looks like trying to say what an AI should do and then making the AI system do those things and prove to you that it is doing those things. So met with a non-trivial amount of resistance, have been, I think also did a surprisingly good job opening or like finding the more open minds and convincing more people. We ran a couple of events. This included like a Guaranteed Safe AI summit with a bunch of really high profile folks. And from that, actually a library for Lean that tries to formalize the undergraduate computer science curriculum, not just like variables, but also all of the like notion of complexity and things like this. That traces back to that GSAI workshop. We have, I guess by the time this airs, we'll have run 2 FMAI conferences. That's Formal Methods and AI, which really should have been FMML. But I think the FML joke would have probably been too tempting. And we named it once. FMAI is like rolls off the tongue. And we're having...
It's not a NeurIPS situation.
Yes. Or at least we landed where NeurIPS ended up. Or like close metaphorically to... Yeah. So that will be at SRI next week for us. In the past for
others. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess just like the last thing about sort of past Atlas that I want to touch on is this prior framing you had, at least like I saw it, I think in a different video or episode or some sort of recording of you. I think it was a talk actually, but trustworthy AI through domain specific formal oversight. So breaking that down, that's like the way that we're going to get systems that we can actually be confident in the outputs and how they're performing is by defining domains and then using these formal methods to guarantee certain behaviors within those domains. And to me, that seems very like my intuition, I guess, when I first heard about all these AI safety problems, was like, wait a second, just build narrower systems and then you can actually specify the constraints, right? And it sounds like it's very aligned with sort of what you're saying. So, do you still think that's sort of what AI safety needs? Is that what you're thinking, and this is just a different way to approach it, or like how have priorities changed for you in the past, couple of years?
I think there are two interesting elements of that. One is that I do tend to think that it is probably safer to build narrower systems. And I think that this is something that people were speaking a lot about with tool AI. I think this is something that people wanted more before it seemed less. I don't know. I don't want to be too dark, but I've somewhat given up hope that people will truly limit general systems. I think that it would be much safer. And I do think that there's a version of this that looks very compelling where, and maybe it's worth cutting to this point. I think there's a version of this that looks really compelling where we have siloed off various like extra strong capabilities like knowledge of bio. Very hard to draw a clean line between what is teaching biology or advancing biomedical research and what is creating bioweapons. And like, I think that this is kind of just a fundamental aspect of the state of the world at the moment and like what technology can do. And this is maybe necessarily always going to be true, but one could argue that the CDC should definitely have access to that without hitting annoying safeguards all the time. But also they probably shouldn't have access to also the ability to do super persuasion and cyber, like hardcore cyber red teaming. Siloing those kinds of capabilities off might be much more plausible with classifiers, but I do think that you do get a really nice safety property of not giving anyone the whole incredibly powerful general system. I also think that there's a different notion of defining domains and narrowing to domains where you can define what safety means or what bad or like what disallowed would mean in different domains. And even if you don't constrain the general system, you could still have constrained definitions of safety in different applications or different regimes. And I think that this actually looks a lot like how we control or how we define like what is legal or what is illegal in different domains. Like there are legal specialties around like cyber fraud versus like IP theft versus like property law. And like I think that if we follow the model of how we've gotten security with people, we don't pick a person and say like, everyone, this is the moral person, be like that person. We say, here are some fundamental ground rules. Everyone should follow those ground rules. And if you do, then you can do whatever you want, like optimize for whatever you want on top of that constraint. There was someone pointed out to me at some point, like you can only ever optimize for one thing. If you think you're optimizing for two things, then you are optimizing for one function of two things. And
As someone who did a lot of work on multi-objective optimization, I fundamentally disagree. However, I understand what the intent is.
Yeah, I think I would be curious to hear more of the disagreement, but maybe that's a topic for another
Well,
time.
you can. It's just you change what you're looking for. You're no longer looking for a single, like you're no longer optimizing one function. You're saying what's the best on this spectrum, like what's the best in terms of, or what are the best potential options along this trade-off. And then you can still optimize for that, what is called like the Pareto frontier, um, can be optimized for. And I guess like when you pick a final like candidate, you have to be optimizing for one thing, but in the exploration phase, you can do a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, okay. I think that is the intent I wished to convey.
Okay. I'm glad I could do
The
that for you.
Yeah, thank you. I the caveat to that, the and to like all of that, is that if you like, you can pile on as many constraints as you want before you do that optimization, and that's fine. And so alignment feels a little bit. I have many issues with the notion of alignment, but one of them is that I think we point to it as an optimization pressure that should just be the thing that we trust, and we don't do that with people at all. We just have lots of constraints, and we have like very nuanced constraint boundaries that take the form of laws for people, and we could do that for AI systems. We could do that with like, I think the thing we should try to have is something like you could imagine for medicine, if we had a super intelligent system, there should be something that has like basically there should be a subsystem that has no agency and merely simulates a human given all of the information that might be relevant. And you could have a different system separate from that that uses that to try to design therapies for a given goal, like treating a disease, increasing longevity, diagnosing something. But the like standalone simulation system, if it were good enough to be able to say, like, we've customized one for each of these 1,000 subjects in the trial, and not only will this this therapy work on like 60% of them, but it will be this 60%. And these are the side effects, and these are who will experience those side effects. Like, this doesn't have to have any agency to be able to do that, but it would be a huge breakthrough, and it doesn't necessarily improve our understanding with like in the same way that a human being able to do that wouldn't necessarily improve our understanding. But you could have in that system a definition for what or it would be a non-trivial exercise, but in that simulation you could define what alive or dead looked like. You could probably start carving out regimes of the state space that look like, is this person healthy or not? And you don't have to define those perfectly, but if you can kind of get a conservative bound on, like, as long as these numbers have these properties, we'll consider this to be a model of a healthy person. And you can interrogate it to see, like, okay, well, like, here's something. Does this...
What does that actually mean in this
Yeah.
case?
Yeah, does that look healthy to you? What does it mean in this case? Yeah. And so, like, I think that there are things like this that would be very useful, even for the, like, mid intermediate term Centaur era for AI accelerated science, where, like, if the AI systems are answering all of the questions, it's still not clear how much humans can or should trust these systems. And, like, it falls kind of back to this question of how do you specify the properties and how do you get the AI systems to give you sufficient evidence to believe that their actions or decisions or outputs have those properties. And so formal methods has ended up being like surprisingly fundamental, and this like the specification problem of how do you know you said what you intend to say. I mean, it shows up with legal contracts. It shows up with like building codes. It shows up with definitions of safety across like software and hardware and medicine and all these things. And it shows like it seems to be a surprisingly universal concept. And I think that there's like two interpretations of the fact that a lot of cultures seem to have myths where people are cursed with exactly what they wish for. And one of them is don't be greedy, don't ask for more things. And the other one is you should be very, very careful what you ask for because it is very hard to specify that.
Yes. The story that I've heard from like a conversation with Sue Kit-chan, who is working with you now at Atlas Computing, is, you know, he was talking with you and you were talking with some other people, and it essentially came up this idea of like, well, I can spin up these AI safety organizations like pretty well. I've done so a number of times. I think the wording that I remembered was like in my sleep. I think you've confirmed that
I think he
you did
has
not
said
say
this.
this. Oh, okay.
I think this is a thing that Zoo has said. It is flattering. It is definitely more effort than that. I would not characterize it as that. But it has been a thing where I think I like on some level just have this had like a strong inferiority complex and imposter syndrome since like basically college, and like just want to be helpful, want to be useful. And so like people would consistently say like no one is like someone needs to be on this because no like here's an important thing and no one is doing it. And like between trying to help drive product prototyping within Atlas when that was what we were doing, and like trying to like find a person to go own that thing, like the latter was far closer to what I had been doing for the last couple of years.
Gotcha. Okay. And so just walk me through this a little bit more about like what this pivot is to you and why this pivot came about. Because I assume it wasn't only talking to Tsu, regardless of how charismatic he is.
Yeah, so about Q3-ish last year, started talking to Zoo, who kept prompting things along the lines of, Evan, what is your unfair advantage? And I realized that of the things that we had been doing around prototyping formal method stuff, that it was a lot easier to help other people with deep technical background and no founder experience go and do the thing rather than me try to build up that experience and build a team and lead it. There was just some amount of strategy that needed to be done first and some amount of like logistics and kind of support, really just activation energy barrier lowering. Another
sure.
example is like Jason Gross, who now runs Theorem, was doing mech-interp research on small neural networks to see if he could prove safety properties about them. And I told him, I think that this has a lot less... well, first, I found him because he has basically the perfect background to run Theorem and do what Theorem is doing now. And I was like, I think you are squandering your perfect background for doing AI-based, AI-first program synthesis, auto-formalization work. I think that now is the time. Will you join Atlas for 6 months? I can pay you to like spend some time doing whatever experiments you think are necessary to determine whether or not now is the time and whether or not this is a viable direction, and also help out with these other things. After 3 months, he and I had applied to Coefficient for funding to extend that work. and he decided that it was better done as a for-profit. And I was supportive of this decision. He resigned on Thursday to incorporate Friday to get the non-dilutive first check on Monday.
Gotcha.
So a lot of people point to Theorem as like, this is a great team. This was like, it was really the first company doing AI first auto formalization. A lot of people were doing like, oh yeah, we'll like be humans using AI tools to do formal verification. And they were like, no, we'll make the models do it. But I feel like I played a non-trivial role in that. And so like things like Theorem, things like Mehmet and Arundel and the tamper responsive heat sinks, I realized that I should like, my superpower is much closer to helping accelerate other people, lower the barrier to entry, and get people who otherwise hadn't and maybe wouldn't found a thing to go found a thing because it looks much more like a job description. And so the pivot was an explicit decision of let's move all of the formal verification prototyping out of Atlas. And so that meant sending Alex Rademacher to Renaissance Philanthropy. He's now the director of CS Lib there. It involved my CTO at the time departing, and the new direction has been trying to figure out where we can use this approach, and ideally building a team of people that I can train to take on this approach of making it easier for other people to take ownership for an intervention that has been well specified. I've kind of generalized from start new organizations to actually just figure out what the best thing is. I think there are many instances where the thing that is missing is actually some fairly minimal coordination. Maybe this is a contract, maybe this is a collaboration, maybe this is a 501c6, which a lot of people seem to have not come across as a legal entity. C6s are like what the car companies use to coordinate around seatbelt safety standards. It helps avoid the like collusion, antitrust, regulatory concerns. And I think that there are many applications where like, so the Frontier Model Forum is an example of a 501c6. And that's much more on, that seems to be fairly narrowly scoped. And I think that there are C6s in the AI space that would be very useful for other applications as well. So the question becomes, can we go from here is a concern to, and like where I've landed specifically is there are foreseeable AI capabilities that break things out in the world, or should be expected to break things out in the world. Are there things that we can do now that would make the world robust to those capabilities showing up?
Right.
What is the smallest possible thing we can do now that will quickly and deterministically get us closer to that world?
Yeah. And then you're saying, okay, so now someone has specified this. They, in theory, then would come to you or your organization and be like, okay, or maybe your organization would do this yourselves, right? Leave the how we got this idea as a black box for now. You have an idea now. You believe that it is going to do that, is going to get you closer to the robust version of the world, to some AI centric AI related harm, or maybe not even AI related necessarily, but you further scope it, like define a couple things, recruit the right leader, give them some resources, and then send them off. Is that correct?
I think I will add a few things.
Okay.
That is correct.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So the process that I am arguing for is that if you have the ability to say, this is what the future should look like, and there are a lot of places where it's very ambiguous what solved looks like alignment would be one of this. Adversarial robustness would be one of this. Online learning is another phrase that people use to describe a problem that falls into this category. There are a lot of things where what should we be driving towards is a big open question. I think there are other things where, nope, we like kind of know that like there should be a tool where someone can like sit down at a computer and run it on their software systems, and it says, hey, here are some things that are like unintuitive about what this software that's running here seems to do. Is this right? And just elicits a specification from that user, because what should the system do is probably in the person's head more than it is on the computer. If it were in the computer, then there would be no bugs. The bug is in fact the difference between what the person thinks it should do and what it actually does. So elicit the spec from the person. Have a tool that does that. This is like a very clear thing that would be very useful. It is a very hard problem, very hard to get funding for this problem. You want a lot of like weird expertise. I am helping a FRO founder at Convergent build this as an FRO.
Okay.
I like I think the right process is, if you have a clear vision for what it should do, go and iterate with all of the relevant experts that you can talk to of, is this vision possible? And then go and also iterate, maybe simultaneously, with a bunch of potential stakeholders and say, like, hey, if this existed, would you use it? Does this actually solve a problem for you? And this is basically establishing product market fit for a thing that you're becoming increasingly convinced is real. And I claim that if you can do those things and you can get the experts to point to one paper and say, this is possible, and the stakeholder, potential user or customers point to the same paper and say, yes, this would solve a problem for me, then you have massively de-risked this. And then you can go and figure out a lot of the like kind of normal strategic aspects of like, okay, what do the 6-month milestones look like? What does the team structure look like to do this? What are the job descriptions for all those members of the team in order to do this? And the more you can structure that, the more recruiting someone to take the leadership roles in that looks like applying for a job. And so what I'm trying to pitch to various philanthropic funders is, hey, you worry about topics. I can generate a bunch of ideas of things that should be done there. And for any one of those ideas, go through, de-risk it with experts and potential stakeholders, and then bring a team and have a funding ready proposal with people conditionally committed to, yes, if the money shows up, we will run with this for 6 months and demonstrate by hitting these milestones that we can do this, and you re-up and you get the impact on track. And so it is very easy, I would say, to make it look like you are doing this and do it badly if you don't get the right experts, or you keep things too ambiguous, or you don't like really push to kill the idea if it is in fact a bad idea, or the 6-month milestones don't quite correspond with what success actually looks like. But I think that if this is done well, then you can really deterministically get to something that should, with very high confidence, move the needle. I don't know how useful it is for me to keep giving examples of either like past things or like potential future
No,
things.
I think that's helpful. So then just to like, I guess, move it to the next spot though. So you say doing this work gets you to a point where you now essentially have either one or a series of job descriptions, basically. And maybe these are more task oriented than your traditional job descriptions, as like do this, like get to this milestone, then get to this milestone, as opposed to, you're doing this every day kind of thing. But still you have this, like, this is the task. And now you're recruiting for that task. What does that look like? How are you doing that? Are you getting those people involved in that first portion as well, like when you were talking with the experts? And I guess maybe what is special or different about how you approach this?
Yeah, I would say that one of good topic, one good area of skepticism that people will raise when they have a lot of experience trying to recruit founders, maybe because they run an incubator or they're a VC or something, is that people will want really high ownership. You will need people who can navigate uncertainty, things along these lines that I think are very true if you don't have product market fit yet. Or if you are working, excuse me. Or it's also true if you are looking for something that needs a total addressable market that is massive or needs to be able to return the fund. I think there are a lot of things that are much more narrowly scoped, much smaller, that are still really impactful, that just don't get a lot of attention or airtime because they're not the sexy research problem or they're not the silver bullet solution. I'm a big advocate for defense in depth, or like the Swiss cheese effect, where like you have lots of different defenses and you know that each one has holes, but you hope that anything that gets through one layer won't get through the next. In practice, if I have a job description for a founder or like a profile, I will be iterating that with the experts that I talk to. Is it possible to find a person who would be the person that would most increase your confidence that this effort will succeed if they signed on? And then when I go talk to those people, I will say things like, through pure serendipity or through some combination of serendipity and your interests, you have become one of the top 5 people in the world to be most qualified to do this thing. And like, I don't say this to everyone. I say this to basically no one because it is almost never true. But it is possible that you doing this thing could be critical for the stability of civilization. And it looks shockingly close to the things that you've been already doing and probably already thinking about and caring about. And there is this potential intervention. There are these advisors. There are these stakeholders. If you can deliver on this thing for these stakeholders, it will leave the world in a much better place. What would it take for you to say yes to this?
Okay. And then that leads to another question that I do want to spend some time on, because I think it's really relevant to maybe some of the practices or like leanings, I guess, of some of the AI safety space that like I don't like as much, and it's about sort of like what your expectation is of these new hires, not just in terms of, essentially they're the best in those things that have been specified, and they have that mix of those traits and those skills, because that's obviously important. But then also, like, is there anything else? Things that are more, I think the phrase that's often used is like value alignment, for example, or personality traits, or things like that that you are filtering for as well, either implicitly or explicitly in like how it's framed and how this process comes about.
I think that I'm definitely implicitly filtering for maybe not that strong. I think on some level, I think that this works best if people do believe that it is very worth planning for a contingency where AI makes things go really weird really soon. But also, I think it's fine if they're just contingency planning. Like, I tend to disagree most with people who are highly certain about how things will go. And I basically never disagree that it is worth planning for the possibility that it might go that particular way. And so I am I'm very happy to think about like what the governance structures should look like if AI systems end up aligned by default and for like a reasonable definition of alignment, and they decide to continue to serve humans and not ever have like a treacherous twist moment or anything like that. But also, it would be really good to be able to detect and predict and like prevent something like a treacherous twist, assuming that it is going to happen, and also prepare for concentration of power and epistemic decay and a possible wildfire pandemic and or stealth pandemic or like all of these things. And so I tend to be I think I tend to be less opinion about value alignment. I think that there are a lot of things that one can believe, and it is very easy. I think I'm trying to remember. It's like there are fewer than 2 to the 23rd people in the is that right? No.
I don't know. That sounds
32.
like a big number.
32. There are fewer than 2 to the 33 people. And so you can only ask 22 yes or no questions where there are some people on both sides before some of the buckets start having no people. And that is not a lot of questions.
Okay.
And
okay.
so if you're looking for value alignment and you want a specific flavor of value alignment and also certain skills and availability and a bunch of other things, I think you just carve down your space way too quickly. And I think it's unnecessary, because if I have a user who's saying, I want so a concrete example, I think that we, instead of reaching for like OAuth based identification of people and using this for cryptographic identity and security measures for anything from like, we'll use a simple example of like, who's ordering these DNA sequences. Be really good to know, like link that to a person. One path is to use OAuth. One path is to use mobile driver's licenses or passports. I think we should be using banking KYC. And I think that if you could get to people at operating systems or browsers and financial service providers and AI providers to say like, okay, we'll all agree to use this standard, expose these APIs, this is how it will work. I think that if you have some amount of that sketched out and it's like, okay, I need someone to deliver this for these people because it will make things better. I don't care what those people believe.
Yeah.
They don't need to be able to navigate. Having value alignment is really good if you're pushing through uncertainty on really long time scales and you can't define a priori what success would look like. If we have users who are already like basically conditionally committed to a thing existing, they'll just say like, nope, that's not what I want. And you just need someone who will be like, okay, what do you want?
Yeah.
Like a lot of different ideologies will lead you to like, okay, what do you want? People who are strongly financially incentivized would be one group where like, if there is money in it, then like, I don't think that I would balk from hiring like a true mercenary to solve a problem if that were the best
The
fit for the
incentives.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then
that makes sense.
I think that doesn't work for my role in this. And I'm trying to hire other people to do basically my role, which I'm calling field strategist. And those folks, I think, need to be able to make the claim that when we start from like, okay, here's a problem area people care about, epistemic risk. How good is our ability to receive trustworthy information and make good decisions with it, like based on it? Lots of AI capabilities you could foresee that would make that worse or harder. Lots of technologies that have been proposed that could be useful. I would like to, for any one of those, be able to take a proposed intervention and a proposed conditionally committed team and say, this is, by construction, the best possible intervention we have come across in all of our conversations. Anytime anyone expressed skepticism, we asked, can you think of a better way to solve this problem? Because we would love a better way to solve this problem. We agree with your skepticism. This does sound unlikely. What's a better way to do it? And if we end up with something at the end of this process that we have confidence in, it will be because we ditched every other alternative. But if there's some incentive at the end, whatever that is, it kind of muddies my ability to stand with confidence and say, this is the right thing. If the field strategist, if we get a kickback based on how many of these we create, then that's an incentive to make these smaller or quicker. Or if it's proportional to the size, if we take like 2% of the intervention, then it's an incentive to have more expensive ones. If the field strategist wants to go found the thing, they are going to be subliminally tracking toward a thing that they would most enjoy or most be able to run. And I think this is a problem with a lot of the, like, we'll find a generalist founder to define the problem and go solve it, or we'll fund an incubator or an accelerator to go build solution to this. They're already pre-assuming the form of the solution as a startup or a product or something that the founder who's investigating this problem can run. I think by like creating this abstraction barrier of like, we will do the strategy, we'll figure out what the best solution is, and we will have no ties to what that solution is until we've settled on this is the one that we think is best. And then we will find the people to do it. I think this dramatically opens the number of things that you can do that suddenly would never make sense for a research team or an incubator or a VC or anything like that.
Yes. Okay. So just to go back to where we were, the flip side of this, like maybe idealized version that you've presented is, okay, well, we don't have these incentives in that, like, we need to be able to run it, or we want to be able to be, meeting these targets. And so it allows for more exploration and to find the theoretically best way to execute on this. And that's like one framing, but then the other framing could, and I think it like is reasonable to consider, okay, but that like the other sort of version is that the specs don't survive contact with reality. So the strategist hands over the specs to the operators. The operators are then the ones that are going to have to live with the consequences of those specs. And you don't ever see the joining of those. And so that can lead to, like a waste of the scoping work or to that extent. Does that make sense? It's sort of like consulting trap.
Is that the consulting trap? I feel like when I think of the consulting trap, it's like also the fact that often there is no incentive to like implement all the things that McKinsey gave you because the board wanted you to hire McKinsey to ask, like to answer some questions for you. I don't know this with very high confidence. So this is more like my hermeneutics of words around like challenges related to consulting. But I think that you're highlighting a true concern, and it is very much the case that as the world starts moving faster and faster, that the ability to go from here's a predicted AI capability, here's an intervention, we built consensus around this intervention, we have someone who will execute on it, is this still relevant? How long did this whole thing take? I think trying to make this whole process take as little time as possible is actually very important. And also trying to scope the interventions to be very narrow things, not like multi-year research projects, but something closer to like an advanced market commitment or setting up some API access to various things across various applications. Ideally things that would take no more than a few months to land. I think that maybe either land or to start providing some value. If it is not useful, then you can scrap this. The goal should be to have something where the incentives are aligned between what each person participating in this has, and also align that with what is better for civilization scale coordination. Like what improves the the question becomes, how do you take people with their with their jobs and their incentives and their OKRs and connect those to the most useful thing that could be done for humanity to be prepared for powerful AI capabilities. And like, of the things that I expect field strategists to come from a lot of different places with a lot of different backgrounds. But one thing that I plan to make sure everyone develops a really strong understanding of is what mechanisms exist out there to adjust incentives or to bypass bureaucracies or better model what it looks like for a large organization that you may not have familiarity with to respond to an opportunity or a challenge or something like this, where this expertise all exists in people, but it rarely all exists in the same person across like government and which would include like Congress and defense and the intelligence community, and also like Fortune 50 companies and like Fortune 200 lower end companies and like big tech companies who fancy themselves different, and VC and the like philanthropic safety space and the international like governance space. There are lots of different mechanisms. Another thing that I like flagging is that there are lots of different quora who might, or quorums, I don't actually know which one is the correct plural, but you can often identify a quorum that would be sufficient to, if they agreed, solve the problem or at least adopt a solution. The one you are first to identify may not be the easiest one to convince. So
right.
How do you find all of the other ones and then sort them based on your ability to reach them and convince them to do this thing? So I expect I expect field strategy work to do a lot of convincing of people, but I also frequently repeat that as intelligence gets expensive, as intelligence gets cheap, agreements or relationships or consensus get expensive. And so this is something that I think will get increasingly hard, increasingly valuable. And I guess this is a very long-winded answer to what happens if the intervention itself doesn't survive contact with reality. Probably should have just stopped after. Keep the intervention as quick as possible. And
okay. And scoped as possible as well. So it's
and try and make it provide value as quickly as possible, so that at least people
incremental steps.
Yeah, if your users aren't saying like, great, this is helpful, but I also want this.
Okay.
Like I think that like having that kind of a pull gets very easy if you talk to founders who are like, yes, we found product market fit, and we know we did because suddenly like the number of feature requests was far longer than the number of things that we had on our roadmap. This is the kind of phenomena that I would hope for everyone executing on one of these interventions.
Okay. And then the next sort of large area that is really worth spending time on, I think, is how you got to and how you get to those interventions. So like, from what I understand, the blueprint that you're working from, and like the thing that defines the problems that you will help build organizations around is a resilience gap map. All right, so real quick, let's talk about what this is, since Evan and I really just jump right into it. Atlas has a publicly accessible Google Sheet called the AI Resilience Gap Map, which lists a collection of what Evan calls organization-shaped holes, which would be good to address in the near future. In a post on the Atlas blog, he explicitly flags that the list isn't a blueprint, rigorous research, or a finalized output. It's the to-do list that Atlas has put together. To build this, he asked a bunch of AI safety organization leaders what's something that someone should do that no one is. And then he organized it into categorizations seen in the sheet today, which led to additional gaps which are currently seen in the sheet as well. The gaps in the list, although interesting, aren't what actually matters here. Instead, it's the process of filling out the other columns on the table, like theory of change, solution direction, initial de-risking, and minimum necessary skills that make up the real value of this effort. The idea is that by filling out a row, you've developed a scoped, de-risked, handoff-ready organization that can go and, make societal resilience better. And the idea is this has like a list of high leverage, underserved opportunities that you think are worth conducting this approach on, right? How did you go about creating that? Who decided what gets on the lists and how?
I would say that the resilience gap map is definitely more of a starting point than kind of a blueprint. I tend to be pretty precise. Well, maybe inconsistently precise, but I try to be precise, and would probably say that instead of a blueprint being this thing where all of the pieces need to happen and they all fit together neatly, it feels more like a maintenance backlog, which is actually the title of the blog post where I introduced that. I called it Civilization's Maintenance Backlog, and I think that there are like a lot of things on there that aren't a good fit for field strategy, admittedly. I think that, well, that list actually was a list that I curated from talking to experts for about a quarter of like random conversations with lots of people, heads of most of the AI safety organizations that you and listeners would have come across, saying, what are things that someone should do, but no one is doing? And wrote all those down. I think that there might be a private version somewhere where I actually have like who said which one, but did not want to leak that information because some of the things ended up being a little outside the Overton window. And it was really meant to just be like where I would put down a lot of these, and I am in the process of iterating on something that looks more like it also includes how good a fit for field strategy a given direction is and why.
Okay.
There are kind of three directions that I'm pushing on currently. One is an advanced market commitment for a formally verified AI inference and training stack from cloud service providers. I think that there will be demand for that, and pulling that demand signal earlier in time will be very useful. And so I'm working my way through conversations with people in those organizations. Another one is this notion of exposing banking KYC for a bunch of applications. I think that as we have more agents, it'll be really useful for your agents to know it's talking to my agent. We don't really have a good way of doing that right now. There are a couple of other things. One of them is trying to figure out exactly how much value a new C6 for coordination on model specs would be. I've flirted with some possible options around, like one around economics, one around a couple around epistemics, and most of the questions, most of what has put things higher on my list personally are: does it feel like the incentives should be aligned? And there is like one quick trick that seems like it just makes people go from this is not my job, this does not make sense for me to help with, but I like that you're trying to do it, to like, oh yeah, I could totally do that. This sounds like a great idea. If my intuition says that like the intervention shifts from the former category to the latter, then it's on my short list. And like the tie to some catastrophic harm reduction might be a little bit more tenuous. The advanced market commitment on cloud inference actually started back with the FlexHag work, because the question became, does this get adopted because of a policy requirement, or does it get adopted because it is financially useful to the companies? And I thought the latter was more high certainty, and therefore finding the right incentive to drive a lot of the investment in the security properties you would want for treaty verification would be really good. Turns out that those assurances are also kind of the assurances that an operator wants against agents running amok on their hardware. So this felt like a similar alignment of incentives. But there is a like good question of who's deciding what's on the list and how. I would be happy to put anything on the list. It's actually anyone on the web can comment. So if people just like email me with like, hey, add these 10 things to the list, I will add them. There's structure on the list. That structure was entirely created post facto for me to try and sort these things. I do think that it is useful to try to organize in a way that makes it more comprehensive, so you can elicit some number of things that would be gaps. There were like, as I was adding structure, there were, I think, like somewhere probably between 5 and 10 things where it was like, oh, well, if people are talking about like these things, then it would also make sense to have these other scenarios also listed where we try to mitigate those. I have a few other like deeper dives. One is into cybersecurity, and so there's like another cybersecurity gap map with like 24, I think, like specific interventions. I have another one that is like in progress for epistemic stuff. But in terms of that's what's on the list. That's not which ones am I working on.
Right. I guess just like sort of digging deeper into that, you say on the one of the tabs, I think, of the gap map that like we're striving for progress, not consensus. And while that may be like there are some things that are good about that, but then the other thing is that gives you and also the people who are funding you and the people who you talk to a lot of power, right? Because it's not ever, I mean, even the people listening to this conversation, I mean, that's a small subset of everyone. So even like majority of people don't know that this exists to contribute to it, let alone have, you know, the time and whatever to do so. So maybe, you know, like some people are okay with this idea, but others probably aren't. And I don't know, the framing that it reminded me of was Zuckerberg's like move fast and break things. It's like it's not as gross like by any means. It's much more tactful, but it still does have this sort of like we want to get things done, and it doesn't matter who agrees with us as much.
Yeah, and I think that this also comes up a little bit with the fact that I, at least in like field strategy job descriptions, have said that I am focusing on either candidates or like both candidates and potential interventions in the United States, with the expectation being that that is higher leverage. Solutions that work in the US are more likely to propagate, things like this. I also feel like a little bit icky about this. I think that there's like a lot of really hard, like fundamental, like ethical, philosophic like questions related to how to weigh in on this. I guess defense in depth is like a reasonable, like multi-layered solutions is a reasonable approach. I think that the very like raw, straightforward answer of like, how does this not just prioritize the people who talk to me, who like come across this list, who comment on it? It does prioritize them. I think that this is not the failure mode it may initially seem to be. I want to, I try to take a perspective that the kinds of interventions should be globally useful to nearly all humans. I think that there is no way to be confident that, like, I think it would be insane to try to like only do things that are useful to all humans or that everyone would agree with. I don't know. I'm pretty sure there isn't a good way to define consensus over all of the people. Like, I have this thought experiment that I love of like, assume technical alignment got solved tomorrow. We have a box. You can put a person in it, and like when they come out, the AI system that was connected to that box will come out aligned to them. What do you do with this box? And like, get a lot of answers. Well, I think one of the better answers was you put every human into the box, and you have the aligned AI systems that come out and debate each other. It's like, okay, well, what if it takes 80 hours for the person? Like, what if the person has to spend 80 hours in the box, or like 800 hours in the box, and it costs $10 million to do it? Then what do you do? Like, there are a lot of different consensus mechanisms, and like voting preference elicitation mechanisms. As soon as you go from I have preference over these K options to like these N people have preference over these K options, if you want to say now like the group of N people have these preferences, you have just done a lossy compression by a factor of N.
Sure.
And there are many ways you could do that. You could weight everyone equally. You could weight everyone in proportion to how much they care about the thing and give them voice points. You could give them like the ability to rank things, arrows and possibility theorem, blah, blah, blah. You could
I
have
think
them
the
elect a
one that
delegate.
I'm most excited about personally, and this has come from a couple different things like that I've done work in, but the way it was described to me best was actually from an advisor from one of the other groups that I work with, named Jan Quackel, and he said, "We're not aiming for consensus; we're aiming for consent," and this is operationalized by consent-based voting in some ways, where instead of voting for who you prefer, you say, what am I okay with, like who are the people that I am okay with being in charge, for example, if you were voting for something. And I think that
Yeah.
having introducing this, it's not about what I would prefer, it's about, what I'm okay with, and then finding the thing that the most people are okay with,
This is approval
is really
voting.
helpful. Sorry, go ahead.
The technical term in like voting, I guess voting theory, I guess, is called
Yeah.
approval voting. And
Yes,
like, I like
I
this.
was
It's
forgetting
good.
the word.
Yeah. I've spent a non-trivial amount of time looking at like different voting structures, because like if you're trying to define, it's like going way back to like the best science, like more, better science, faster and cheaper. Like you basically have to elicit preferences over that,
Yeah.
and like you have to combine those preferences.
So what are your thoughts about
Anyway,
approval voting versus the preference? I mean, just
I like approval voting. I also have like a random soft spot in my heart for sortition, which is election by lottery. I I think of the problems that I'm looking at, I'm really trying to find things where like AI will be able to do X. The It is easy to imagine X resulting in Y, Y would be something that nearly all humans would point to and say, I was negatively impacted by Y. I think that an example from an example from the past, I think it's like very easy for everyone to say like I was negatively impacted by like the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, would be really great to avoid things like that that are like as universally loathed as that. I think that like I don't know anyone who like hates community notes. I know a lot of people who love it. I know a lot of people who are ambivalent to community notes, but having that in more places, if there is like an easy thing to do to make that more common, I think this looks a lot different than trying to have interventions that are more about defining or shaping good rather than preventing catastrophes or mitigating harms or things like that. There are some harms that are in direct tension with each other. I think that privacy and epistemic security and like preventing concentration of power sit somewhat antithetically to biosecurity and cybersecurity and some aspects of loss of control. And like it is unclear what the Pareto surface is there, but I think the Pareto frontier is there. But I think it's worth trying to find things that are like reasonable Pareto improvements over the current technological trajectory and do some kind of like differential technological development where relevant, or like differential coordination, things like that.
Okay. And then, so you talked a little bit about like how you prioritize them, which is, at least from what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, essentially like what is the thing that is the most tractable out of these. But then there's also got to be an aspect that's about, like, I mean, there has to be preferences somewhere that are not as objective. And I don't know, this is probably just partially my worldview coming out here, but I do see a significant concern being that, well, the grantor, those who provide the money, are just going to say, oh, well, we actually, only care about this subset of the issues that you presented, so that's what we're going to fund. Then you do that, and then you become really this, like, I don't know, like, it becomes consulting that has this, like, altruistic flavoring, but is not actually that.
Interestingly, I think that even in that failure mode, which I would consider a failure mode, the people who work at that funding agency are not going to consider it a failure.
No, they are not.
This is one of the reasons that I think I will like briefly point at as I walk by the fact that I don't know if any preferences are non-objective. I'm always the guy referencing Hume's guillotine or the Izot chasm in conversations like this. I think that there was at least one opportunity where I was like invited / asked to apply to be a grant maker. And like when I said I think I want a team to do this, was told like you could have a team. And I think that there's the hard answer for like why I didn't say yes to that is exactly this, like, I don't want to actually become captive to a particular funder's interests, because I think that this approach is compelling enough that it should be applied across a lot of things. And if I can make it work, then I would expect a lot of other people to mirror it. Or like if we automate all the jobs, then I would expect other organizations to adopt this type signature. But also, like, easier answers include things like, well, what if it turns out that one funder wanted an exploration of the interventions, but the best interventions don't suit the kinds of things that they would support for whatever reason, but they still want it done. I can go and shop that to different people who might be able to fund that end state intervention. And so this is kind of like a weird consensus mechanism of like someone needs to care enough about both the problem and believe enough in the intervention for this to work. And if that ends up being two different funders, that's extra validation. I'm not going to argue that that's a good consensus mechanism, but I think that the fact that that will require a second approval is like a good surfacing of like, is Atlas doing good work?
Yeah.
I think that I'm in the process of trying to come up with better ways of sorting or identifying than purely like, is it tractable? Did Evan come up with the cute solution that he likes? I love coming up with cute solutions.
I do too. Like, cute solutions are great. The sort of idea that you were bringing up with getting, I guess, buy-in, like someone says, I want you to determine what the best solutions are to do X, and then you go do that, and so now you're establishing yourself as doing a good job at conducting this sort of field research, prioritization for interventions, and then they probably fund that because they think the things that they want to do, either like they really care about the output, or the things that they want to do are going to be aligned with the interventions that you surface. And if that isn't the case, if the interventions you surface are not what they were thinking, you say, okay, that's fine. I'll go share this with everyone else and say, here are these cool interventions that I think will address this problem. Do you want to do it? And by having that second mechanism, you're able to secure this. That's all great. The other just sort of wrench that's thrown in here is you are a nonprofit organization that's not taking any cuts of the organizational interventions that you develop, and you need funding to exist. How are you building in resilience to this plan? Because it sounds like, again, in theory, great, but you also sort of need to have that resilience.
Yeah. I think the incentive as Atlas would be to get enough funding upfront to generate interventions. And like on some level, if we only get funded to generate interventions, then there's no incentive to actually try to make the interventions happen directly. But I think there's a strong indirect incentive in that the only way we are going to fundraise successfully for a second set of interventions is if some of the things actually landed. So I think that I think that I should probably worry more about this. I feel like doing useful things, particularly addressing this problem where I think there are a lot of funders who say, I wish there were more highly qualified teams with clear plans that really seem to mitigate the risks that I care about, or like unblock the potential capabilities that I care about. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the thing that people who will be trying to deploy philanthropic capital will want. It's at least one of the things that they'll want. I think that funding research is incredibly valuable and complementary. I think funding products is incredibly valuable and complementary. I think that there will be some products that will never return the fund that just don't make sense for venture investment that like we might do a better job highlighting. But if we found some of those companies, then like it feels like it'd be pretty easy to just send the founders to an incubator or an accelerator or something. But like I don't have plans to run that, like build or run that incubator or accelerator. I think that taking some just trying to have some amount of longevity baked into the intervention where like, yes, we will spend like 3 to 9 months building out interventions for things in this topic, with the understanding being that we're asking for like 6 to 12 months of funding for it. And if people wanted to provide additional funding or runway to support the team generally, like, I think that that works well as an, like, you did good work, here's extra funding, might not fit a lot of funders, but would be right for
But
the
do you
incentive.
really think they'll do that? Because, like, I don't know. I understand what you're saying
I mean,
in principle, but I just don't. That to me, like the
a better,
incentives just aren't
you're
there.
right, yeah, a more realistic version is a like one for us, one for you kind of model, where it's like, hey, you have come up with great interventions for the things that we thought were important. What do you think are important? Why don't you have some field strategists chase those things down, because we're interested to see what you come up with. I also am on some level preparing for a recoverable catastrophe, aka the warning shot. I think that the warning shots look different in different domains, but I would expect that the thing that you'll want to do afterward is be able to deploy a lot of government funding to improve security and in different aspects, and identify the fastest, most high confidence intervention. And like the types of interventions probably change because it's now much easier to like pass a law to do a thing maybe. But of the things that I think about, one of them is the fact that like it's not clear to me what the warning shots look like for epistemic risks. Bio and cyber, those look pretty clear, but like I think that it's not clear what kind of an event that is foreseeable would increase willingness to pay costs to improve the epistemic environment. And so
I think it's much easier to think of the kinds of catastrophes, or even not catastrophes, just like states of the world, which would de-incentivize even further doing that for the people who can.
Yeah,
Because
rough.
power wants to entrench itself. That's just how it works. And yeah, I don't know what the solution is to that. I think but that's like the one that keeps me.
Checks and balances is the canonical one.
Checks and balances is what should, in theory, work, and there are other like, more interesting mechanisms as well. But you then need to get buy-in from the different parties, and you need to not have those undermined systemically for half a century.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And you can even point to I think George Washington's farewell address included "Don't start political parties."
yeah.
Oops.
Yeah. Real quick, I know that we're already 4 minutes over. Do you have a little bit longer?
I do.
Okay, cool. So I want to hit one last thing here, and then we'll skip to like the closing stuff. So in terms of funders, I assume, and I guess I don't know for sure, and I don't know if you can fully disclose either, but like I think you say on some of the promotional material, like open philanthropy / coefficient giving, survival and flourishing fund. So I sort of think of these as the usual suspects for this kind of work. But then you also have DARPA on there. And that I don't think is as common. And so I'd like to know a little bit more about why include them, and also what interventions or security watches you're putting in place to prevent becoming just like a sort of like selling sovereignty kind of organization where you are just conducting the interventions for whatever government wants to buy your services.
I don't know if I've come across the selling sovereignty paradigm.
So I think that maybe the term that I'm pulling from is like from I think it was is discussed in like a book about Muskism. So it's using similar to like Fordism being a paradigm from like last the 1900s. Muskism is this sort of turn to but like they use Elon Musk as a case study, but then they sort of demonstrate this like SpaceX being, replacing a lot of the like functionality of like NASA and things like that, or
And also
Starlink.
SIGINT. Yeah.
Yeah, Starlink being, like a critical aspect for certain people's national security now, and so it then allows these
Yeah, these are like privatized administration
organizations.
markets, basically.
Yes,
Yeah. Have you come across the administration markets blog post?
I have not.
Let me share it with you. It's a really interesting proposal of like, why does each like small town or each state have to do its own like administration on like taxes, like property taxes, or like school management, things like this, and like what would it look like to actually have markets for this where the groups that do well can offer to more, but if it's still a government service, and like then going and like if one were privatizing that, there creates a lot of hazards.
Yes, exactly, and then
So
that happening.
yeah,
I guess.
and it is happening. Yeah, in certain things. So I would say on the one hand, it is worth noting that while I would say Atlas is collaborating with DARPA, there's lots of conversations, lots of like, oh, hey, like talk to these people, things like that. Also, ARIA in the UK is an ARPA-like entity. It is more focused on science than defense as the main distinguishing factor, but the current CEO of ARIA was shortly before that the head of I2O at DARPA. I think that like if you look at what Atlas is trying to do and you said like this can't be new, who has done that, like whose responsibility was this before now? The answer was government. Like find problems, predict problems, and try to prevent those problems from causing large like society scale catastrophes or like decreases in like citizen welfare or things like this is a government service. It fits reasonably well as a nonprofit as we have government becoming increasingly less. As we see state capacity decrease, it makes more sense to do this as a nonprofit. I think that we are seeing a current social trend towards increasing state capacity with like the abundance movement and the progress movement and things like this. So it hopefully makes increasing amounts of sense for government to put money into this, to think about this. I think one of the risks of selling sovereignty comes from the notion that like a for-profit corporation must be profit-seeking or ends up being profit-seeking. I think that there isn't as much in like the incentive is much, much smaller for Atlas to expand globally. Like I'm not going to see a big markup in my equity because it's a nonprofit and there is no equity. It would be nice to have this, like, there is virtually no difference between hiring someone to be head of like the London office or like for UK Atlas, or me helping someone start something Atlas shaped in the UK.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like,
There's
I am
no
in the
reason for you to care. It's
yeah.
yeah, because they should want to work with you regardless because it's
I am
helpful
trying
and
to create a like I'm thinking through what it would mean to have an adjunct field strategist role where if someone basically could be a field strategist, is doing the work, would like to coordinate and collaborate with us on a bunch of things, but for whatever reason, like shouldn't take a paycheck or like doesn't want to take a paycheck from Atlas, that like we could expose them to all of our like conversation notes and all of our like plans and our crazy ideas and like who we're talking to next so they can get questions in front of the right expert if we're like able to make the right introduction. This feels like a very useful thing to do, and I
yeah.
like it wouldn't if we were for profit because there'd be like IP in this somewhere that we need to claim and like fight with the current employer about it or things like this. So I don't think I think that this works weirdly well as a nonprofit and for like a lot of small narrow and like kind of need to get into it to think about it reason. I also think that like there is a non-zero chance that like I mean you get into this because you like public service, you want to fix things, maybe you're worried about stuff. I gotta say I love meta science still. I think if I weren't worried about AI, if all of the GPUs got bricked and we found out that like current approaches are hitting a wall, I'd be like, great, time to go do meta science over at Convergent Research, where I like trying to start one fro, would love to help start a bunch of other fros. There's like a call for the NSF X Labs, which are basically fros, but like very expensive fros. NSF wants to fund a bunch of these. Some of them include like basically exactly what my PhD was on, quantum networking and photonic interconnects. And like, it's hilarious how relevant my background is to exactly this, but I'm too worried about AI to work on that. So, yeah, I think that I worry about a lot of things, including my own incentives, but I don't particularly worry about a world where I am like exercising international control over states' abilities to solve their own problems. Because I think exactly like maybe a good example is that if someone leaves my anytime someone has left my team, I think they've always been someone where like if they left to go do something else, I've always been excited for them to go and do those things because I hired them because I wanted to work with them to advance goals that I thought were good. And if it made sense for them to go do this other thing, then they're doing it because they believe it will help them better achieve goals that I think are good. And I think this is not something that I think would be like universally true across all like potential employers or managers. But I think that the fact that this is something I hold reasonably strongly is like a decently good indicator that like, yeah, if we started a UK branch and then the UK branch wanted to declare independence, I'd be like, let's
as long as
for
you're
me.
yeah, that makes sense.
I would also say that if someone said, Evan, I like what you're doing with Atlas. I want to take over. Here are all the reasons why like you should just leave and no longer be a part of this. I got it from here. I'd be like, thank you.
Yeah, that is what we all want, isn't it? Although I guess the other thing is just like, isn't that what someone who wanted to, take over, be controlling all the different nations would say? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. I think that at least one person with that aspiration would say, what was the phrase?
Exactly.
That's loser mentality, and I'm not a loser.
Yeah, that's a great point. And maybe that's a good like shift towards the final sort of like more fun, quicker things that I like to ask towards the end. The first one is just like, what sort of what grinds your gears? What makes you like irritated or things that you don't as much enjoy about what it is that you do?
I can probably get like painfully specific, but the category is I like doing things that are clearly trying to solve the problem
Hmm.
and like doing the thing. And I think that when there are barriers in front of me that look like, well, you can't do the thing because we need you to do this unrelated thing that will not actually help you do the thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's some
irritating.
that I
It's
yeah.
um yeah. Okay, next one is what's something like within the past year or so that you used to believe about AI or AI safety, and you've like updated on it. Something has changed. Not something. Yes, something that you essentially you would be like, yeah, I was wrong, kind of thing.
Probably the first one that comes to mind is that I had a nice long chat with Davidad about his uh, kind of like change of assumptions from like the safeguarded AI framework to where he's currently at.
Hmm.
And I think that there was a combination of both like trying to get provable safety properties over all AI systems over a certain level of capability is like I now think is probably infeasible unless there is also like regulatory willingness on
Mm.
a lot more things. Regulatory willingness might be a thing for a lot more. I think that even the but China arguments have gotten weaker as a lot of the language out of China comes down on the like, this is a real risk. We need to not be in a race to the bottom.
Okay, and then uh, let's say a listener is like, all right, Atlas sounds great. This is what I want. Like I wanted something like this for so long. Uh, what should I do? What would your advice to them be?
I think that there are probably two. There are people who think that or have said that fall into roughly two categories. There is one category of people who like basically are already doing this and just didn't have the term for it.
Yeah.
And for those people, I'm like roughly trying to assemble this team. Currently in the process of fundraising for assembling a team of like I think 5 to 10ish initially, and trying to grow quickly thereafter. Would love to talk to people who have done this work in some way. I am very findable online. evan@atlascomputing.org is my email. To people who want to do this and maybe don't have experience, I am trying to build up a team to uh, be able to take on mentees soon and train people who could do this. I want a real explosion in the number of people doing this. I think that it has capacity to be like roughly on the same scale as like impact investing or like impact venture or like the number of it seems like the number of incubators focused on like AI safety or AI security should probably like the number of startups doing AI safety and AI security products should probably be about the same size as the number of field strategists identifying interventions that are not products that could return the fund. Just as like rough order of magnitude, I would probably argue that most of the correction terms make the number of field strategists probably higher. Unless you, well, neglectedness makes the field strategy number go higher. The time needed to deploy an intervention makes the field strategy number, like carrying capacity, go lower. But I think starting at the same order of magnitude would roughly be a reasonable estimate. And
Hmm.
I think starting by finding a thing that, I guess the specific advice would be try to do this. I have like a blog post up that's like, here is my general process. I have lists of things, pick the thing that seems like the best fit, and then really go through and try to identify who are the relevant experts, get to those people, and get them to sign off on this being a good intervention. Use the models to emulate them before you do that. And like really red team, and similarly try to find paths to the potential adopters. I think people who are already in the AI security or AI safety space already have access to a surprising number of possible stakeholders through relevant events. It's like very easy to catch like CISO of a frontier lab after a conference, or after their talk at a conference, compared to a lot of other fields.
Okay. And then last but not least, the question I ask everyone, what is your favorite part about what you do?
I think probably is a split between people saying, what you described is exactly what I've been doing or been trying to do, or like, this is a perfect fit for me, or like, I think having people be very excited to do what is basically work, especially if they're like qualitatively more excited than they thought they could be excited about a job. That is good. I also really like when I get buy-in on an idea, especially if it's a particularly cute idea. Like, I think that I don't know who gets trained where to design incentive mechanisms and do better coordination, but I feel like humanity does not do it nearly enough. And like, there is so much room for improvement. And like this is, I don't know how much of this is intentional or latent or just like an echo that keeps reverberating through my work history, but the motto for network goods was revolutionary coordination systems, and it feels like it's what I'm trying to do now. Lots of mechanisms to support public goods, and I think that like maybe the thing I enjoy most, the overarching theme, is that I really like getting evidence, concrete evidence that things can actually just be better in a pretty like universal and like in a pretty universal way where it seems unobjectionable that like, yeah, if that exists, it's hard to imagine someone saying that would be a bad thing unless they were saying so in bad faith. And like, I think there are a lot of those. And I think trying to either making progress toward that or helping more people see the distance between where we are and where we could be. Probably my two favorite parts.
Awesome. Well, Evan, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a ton of fun to talk with you. And
thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to see where Atlas Computing is going.
Appreciate it. This was delightful chatting, and look forward to chatting more at some point.
If you couldn't tell from the interview, I had a fantastic time speaking with Evan. One thing that I really liked about his perspective, which also just resonates with me strongly, is that a lot of very important work is stalled because it requires someone deciding it's their problem, which is maybe both a bit uncomfy and reassuring at the same time. Also, I literally just checked, and while I greatly appreciate all the star-based reviews I've received, I still don't have a single testimonial review, at least as of recording this. Like, seriously, those like really drive the platform suggestions, so if you think this is worth other people hearing, please consider leaving your thoughts. That's gonna be it from me. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.